Honey's story is a story of three locations, three families, three children, and now three grandchildren. But let's begin the story of Honey at the beginning. On June 6, 1944, two important events occurred. One was D-Day, the Allied invasion of the Normandy beaches. The other was the birth of Honey. Honey told me this is how she started all her compositions through her elementary school years. She was born on East 151st Street off Kinsman Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio. Not only was the date of her birth historically significant, but Zoltan Sant, her dad, and Violet Roseman Sant, her mom, gave her a most unusual name, Honey Joy. What were her parents thinking? Well, 4 years previous, in July 1940, they had had a little boy, James Roseman Sant. Now, that is a normal name. So the story goes that Violet and Zoltan knew they were only going to have two children, and they were delighted to have a little girl to go with their little boy. But that's not the whole story. To understand the whole story, one has to go back to a beautiful love story set in Sătăraiehu in Hungary. Marcus and Rose Roseman had left there in 1905 with their son Zoltan and baby Violet, Honey's mother. A second daughter, Florence, was born after they arrived in Cleveland. The family opened a successful grocery store in the Buckeye neighborhood where they lived. However, the family fortunes were going to move in a completely different direction. Zoltan, called Sal in America, got an engineering degree from Case Institute of Technology and married Ruth. Florence, called Fodi, married Adolf Roth, also a civil engineer. Sal's degree and Grandpa Marcus's ambition led to their opening a structural steel company on East 81st Street in Cleveland called Roseman Structural Iron Works. But back to that Hungarian romance. As Violet was growing up, Rose decided that she would not only marry a Jewish Hungarian, but a Jewish Hungarian from the old country. So Rose and Violet traveled back to their hometown, Sătăraiehu, in the late 1930s to find a husband. Many suitors lined up, but Zoltan Sant was the most persistent. He was not only Jewish and Hungarian, but he had an engineering degree from Budapest University. He had served in the Hungarian army. They were married in a civil ceremony in Hungary. Honey's mother and grandmother returned to America and waited for Zoltan to get his papers in order to join them in Cleveland. Who was this new bridegroom? Zoltan's father was named Josef and his mother was Rosa. In addition to Zoltan, they had a daughter named Ilonka. Rosa died shortly after Ilonka was born. As in an old Jewish tradition, Joseph married Rosa's younger sister, Hani. They had two more children, Bela and Rosa. All of Zoltan's siblings married and had children. Honey's father was able to leave Hungary, but tragically, the rest of Zoltan's family perished in Auschwitz. There is the derivation of Honey's name, named after Hani, Zoltan's beloved stepmother. Before Honey's mother and grandmother returned to the United States, they tried to persuade grandmother's brother to leave Hungary and bring his family to Cleveland. Unfortunately, mother and grandmother were not successful. After the war, Grandma Roseman learned that her niece, Susie, had survived Auschwitz, and she was brought to join the family in Cleveland. Cousin Susie lived with Grandma Roseman and Auntie Fodi and her family until she married David Gottesman, another Hungarian Holocaust survivor. They settled down in Cleveland, had two children, Robbie and Debbie, and stayed intimately involved with the Roth, Sant, Roseman families. The three families grew. Florence had two children, Loretta and Ronnie. Uncle Sal and Auntie Ruth had two boys, Roger and Louis. Roger and Honey were born 4 days apart. All the cousins grew up inseparable. All three families had moved to Shaker Heights and lived within a block of one another. They played in each other's houses, down the street on Van Aken Boulevard, or in the shop on East 81st Street. Sometimes the family combined the shop life and the workers with life on Van Aken, holding company picnics and barbecues in the backyards. But you know that children often do not stick around home. As a young adult, Loretta moved to Israel and married Yoram. They had 5 boys, all now married with children. This was the beginning of a link between Honey and Israel. Jim got married, moved to Berkeley, California, and had a son, Claudio. Another significant location, the Bay Area. Ron moved to New York, to Europe, and to California. Roger married, moved to St. Louis, and had 3 kids. Louis stayed in Cleveland, married, and had 3 kids. But let's return to Honey's life. She graduated from Shaker Heights High School. 2 friends from high school have remained in her life, Arlen Brownstein, now Serber, and Karen Burns, now newborn. Honey called herself a dork in high school, but things began to change in college at Flora Stone Mather. She had 2 groups of friends in college, the good girls, with whom she lost contact after graduation, and the hip kids, 4 of whom, Ilyana Landis, Enid Zuckerman, Barbara Kessler, now Good, and Ann Forster, have remained friends to this day. Honey got a steady boyfriend and became involved in radical politics through him. Part of the college experience was ushering at the Cleveland Orchestra and bringing the boyfriend as a guest and then going out drinking after concerts. While ushering, she met Susie Slavin, who also remains a friend to date. She graduated from Mather in 1965 and took an extra year to get a teaching certificate, awarded in 1966. And then, when her parents gave Jim and his wife a trip to Europe as a honeymoon, she threw a fit and got to go to Europe also. The family made a plan that they would all gather in Israel, Jim and his wife, Mom and Dad, and Honey. Now, Israel was not just Loretta's home, but a place that Honey would return to again and again. On her return to the States, she followed her brother Jim to the Bay Area, moving to the Haight-Ashbury, then to the hippie house on Portreo Hill. All the people there were transients except 2 who have remained friends to this day, Phil Kent and Sarah Cousins. Jim and his wife, with their son Claudio, lived in Berkeley and later in Marin, and Honey stayed in San Francisco. Jim's marriage dissolved, but Honey was a part of his life all along. She became the liaison between Jim's son Claudio and his grandparents living in Cleveland. So, with apologies to Dickens, we could have given this story the alternate title, A Tale of 3 Cities. We have introduced Cleveland, Israel, and the Bay Area, the centers of life for Honey, for many, many years. Honey became a teacher in the inner city schools in San Francisco, organizing student demonstrations for equal opportunities for blacks and Latino students. The student organizer who worked with her, Colleen Crosby, and Honey remained friends. Honey partook of the wonders of the hippie scene in the Bay Area and beyond. This included attending Woodstock and Altamont, a Thelma and Louise type drive across the United States with her hippie house roommate Sarah Cousins in a red convertible Carmen Ghia, which did not end unhappily. Sarah later became religious, moved to Israel, married, and had 6 children and became a successful writer. Sarah and Honey are still best friends. Honey became involved with hallucinogens that were part of that music and hippie culture, but she remained committed to actions related to social justice and to teaching. These were exhilarating times. During one of the radical meetings at the hippie house, Honey met her future husband, Corky. Their romance blossomed on a trip to Mexico that lasted 6 months. Corky fixed up his pickup truck as a camper, and with Sam the dog they headed south. They ended up on a beach near Puerto Vallarta, skin diving, snorkeling, befriending the Mexican villagers and two Americanos that they met on the beach, Jerry Rosenblum and Terry Reamer, who have also remained friends over the years. Returning from the adventures in Mexico, Corky and Honey got married and rented a house that was basically falling apart. In exchange for Corky fixing up the house, the landlord charged a low rent. They started their family with Orrin Joseph, named in memory of Honey's paternal grandfather. Jerry and Ilyana served as godparents to the baby. Before Orrin's second birthday, Honey's parents suggested that the fledgling family move across the Golden Gate Bridge to the house in San Anselmo that Honey's brother Jim and his family had lived in. This house offered a better opportunity because even though it needed work, it was in the family. Corky did major fix-up work. When her parents came to visit, her mother insisted on supplying curtains for the windows, and her dad worked in the garden, with baby Orrin assisting. The visit coincided with Pesach, and part of the family got together: Mom and Dad, Honey and Corky, Orrin, Jim, and Claudio. In this Elm Street house, Eleanor Rose was born the following fall, and Honey's parents returned. When Honey's father came to the recovery room, she told him that she was naming this little girl Eleanor Rose in memory and honor of his two sisters. Shortly after this, Honey's father died. Honey's father had been a funny, gentle spirit in the family. At family gatherings, he played Hungarian czardases on his violin and told jokes. His death was a terrible loss for Honey and a real sadness that Orrin and Elena would not know their grandfather. In Marin County, Honey joined with the other young mothers to set up a cooperative nursery, a babysitting co-op, and a food co-op. One of those mothers, Sue English, is Honey's friend to this day. Their lifestyle also included family camping trips. Moving to Marin and having Orrin and Ilona pushed Honey to become more involved in her Jewish heritage. Soon, the kids went to the local JCC preschool, the family joined the synagogue, attended adult classes, and Shabbat and holiday services. Despite the growing Jewish connections, they remained true to the hippie heritage of the 60s. There were frequent visits back to Cleveland for holidays. The children loved their grandma's house on Van Aken. There was a huge yard and a banister to slide down inside. At this time, it became clear that moving back to Cleveland would be wise because Honey's mother was ill. Jim had already returned to Cleveland with his wife Charlotte and her son Jesse. Corky closed his business, the Masseys packed their belongings, and Corky drove with Orrin and all of their belongings and some of Jim's. Honey, pregnant with Rivka, flew to Cleveland with Illy. After living for a few months in her childhood home on Van Aken Boulevard, the family bought their own first home on East Fairfax in Cleveland Heights, which had a wonderful neighborhood association. They made friends with David and Sharon Richardson and their kids Mark and Helena. Honey has stayed friends with them to this day. The two Massey kids went to the Mayfield JCC preschool, where the family became friends with the Seidells and the Knorrs. They camped with them and celebrated with them. They have also remained friends. Honey still remains friends with another JCC family, Beth and Steve Fleet, whom she now visits in Massachusetts. In February, baby Rivka Ann was born. There was a touch of jealousy on Elena's part. When she came to the hospital, her first reaction was, "Could you give her back?" Juggling the three kids was quite a handful, and Honey turned to drink lemonade. Corky had opened up a home repair and remodeling business, spending much time building up a clientele. The best times were holidays on Shabbats with family. Every Shabbat, Honey and baby Rivka went to Grandma's to read the Torah portion for the week and discuss it. They enjoyed Seder at Auntie Fodi's house with the Saunts and the Masseys. Sadly, less than a year after returning to Cleveland, Honey's mother died. Even though they had planned to return to California, roots were put down in Cleveland during that year. Beth Am Synagogue and a commitment to put the children in the newly founded Solomon Schechter Day School, where Massey kids were 1/8 of the student population of 16 kids. It seemed worthwhile to stay because there was family here. Zoli was a new addition to the Sant family. But the Masseys still kept one foot in California, visiting Arlen and her growing family, and Sue and Bob and their growing family. The Masseys then bought a larger home for their own growing family on Compton Road in Cleveland Heights. Corky expanded his business, working with Marianne, who with his wife Donna became social friends. This friendship continues also. The involvement when Solomon Schechter Day School came with a greater connection to Judaism. Neighbors and friends were invited to the huge sukkah Corky built in the backyard. Honey became the Park Synagogue youth coordinator, spending hours on the phone organizing teen activities, connecting with teens again. All family activities were shared with the Saunts, including holidays. Even though it was not the same as the Sant-Rosemond-Roth connection on Van Aken Boulevard, during the week, the Sant and Massey kids were together at Solomon Schechter School, and on Shabbat, the Sant kids were together with the Masseys. There was now Jesse, Jamie, and Zoli. Jesse was Oren's buddy, Jamie was Illy's buddy, and Rivka had Zoli to deal with. Jim led the Seders in the style they had grown up with. The more involved with Judaism that the family became, the more Honey felt attracted to explore those connections with Israel previously forged. So the family went on a pilot trip to Israel during the summer of 1985, sponsored by the Jewish National Fund, with the plan to clean out a forest in the Galil. After working until 1 o'clock, there were classes and tours all over Israel and meetings with Israeli Jews, Arabs, Bedouins, and Druze. The program ended with attendance at the Maccabiah Games. Because Honey already had her cousin Loretta Cole and her best friend Sarah Shapiro living in Israel, the Massey family spent an additional month in Israel after the work project was done, exploring the idea of making Aliyah. The Masseys also met with relatives of Solomon Schechter friends. During this time, they missed Jesse Sant's bar mitzvah back in the States. The Massey family came home, having determined that this would be their last year in the U.S. Corky ended his business again. Honey finished her work. The kids said goodbye to the friends at Schechter. Corky got the milled wood to build crates for their belongings. They packed up their things. Schechter friends Linda Tobin and Steve Pepper gave them a wonderful going-away party at the pool of their home. The Cleveland community honored them for making Aliyah, and they moved to Israel in the summer of 1986. For 9 months, they lived in 3 rooms in the absorption center in Ra'anana. The kids entered the Tali school system, close in spirit to Solomon Schechter Day School, but actually class events were not at swimming pools, but consisted of excursions out in the countryside with armed guards. Shabbats were shared with other Tali families at the beach. Honey found a rental house in Kfar Saba, sharing a common wall with a Yemenite family and a Polish family. This time, the kids helped Corky make it livable. The lifts came with their belongings. Real Israeli life began. Corky started to do remodeling and home repair work, and Honey got retraining as an English foreign language teacher. It was a strenuous schedule for Honey. She taught English in a middle school in Herzliya full time. 2 days a week she taught in a private school in an afternoon program in Kfar Saba. Once a week she taught women at Na'amat, a Jewish women's organization that helps women with few educational opportunities in their childhoods. She also tutored officers in the Israeli Defense Forces who wanted to improve their English before their missions with English-speaking colleagues. When there was any spare time, she also did private tutoring. Visitors from Cleveland began to flow in, both friends and family. Every visit required trips all over the country. The family joined a Masorti synagogue close in spirit to Beth Am, but it met in the communal room of a school which was open to the sky with birds chirping overhead. Oren had his bar mitzvah, Ilana had a bat mitzvah. The family continued the Purim costume traditions. They kept up some American traditions, like celebrating Mother's Day together. On the other hand, donning gas masks during the Gulf War and going into a sealed room was a uniquely Israeli experience not related to America. The Masseys began to miss important events in the Sant family, like Jamie's bat mitzvah at Bethel. The trade-off was celebrations with the Cole family, with cousin Ronnie and Auntie Fody coming from the States to join some festivities. The Cleveland connection remained alive, with several visits back over the years to see friends and family. Honey's family then took advantage of the mortgage loan given to new immigrants and bought a rundown house very close to where they were renting. Corky fixed up the backyard first so the family could celebrate Rivka's bat mitzvah. Previous mitzvah celebrations were held in the Cole family home. This was the first such event in their own home. It was even more special because of the attendance of Honey's religious friend from Jerusalem and by the visit of Jim and Zoli, who participated. Jim and Zoli also toured a bit of the country. Corky worked very closely with an Arab contractor who lived in a small Arab village. The Massey family visited with them, and they visited the family to share some celebrations. Orrin and Elena took a trip on their own back to Cleveland, where the Saunts entertained them and showed them the sights. At this time, Honey worried that her kids would want to move back to the U.S., but when they got off the plane on their return, they described America as big, green, and rich. The Masseys settled back into a home routine, building another sukkah and entertaining friends from the kids' schools and from their congregation. Then came milestone events of Israeli life. Orrin entered the army, and after basic training, he became a tank commander and served in the north. This filled Honey with great pride and a bit of apprehension, but allowed the family to take trips up north to visit Orrin on occasion. Then Ilana entered the army. After basic training, she became a teacher of English to new Russian immigrants. She was stationed in a development town on the northern border. There were visits to Ilana's base also. They contrasted this with the life of the Sant family in America. For example, Jamie's glamorous high school graduation picture. Mixed in with the seriousness of life in Israel was maintaining the traditional silliness of costumes at Purim. The family maintained connection with friends in California and friends and family in Cleveland. Visits with family in Cleveland were reciprocated. Zoli came to Israel, and there were trips around the country. Rivka then wrote, directed, and starred in her high school graduation production. Then it was her turn to enter the army. Theatrical as always, she let her brother give her a buzz cut, and after training she became a liaison in the intelligence department for English-speaking officers meeting with their counterparts in the Israeli army. As Rivka was going into the army, her brother and sister finished their army duties and began their independent lives. Unlike most Israeli soldiers who leave the country for an extended period after their service, Oren went straight into studies at Beit Berel, the community college located near Kfar Saba. He lived in a trailer on a moshav near campus and traveled by bike. He began to get paid for his love of nature. Previously, Oren had rescued animals in the wild, and now he worked on a duck farm in another moshav, teaching school children about living in harmony with the world around them. Ilana took a different route. She decided to take an extended trip through Central and South America and then spend time in Southern California, where she got a job. The family missed her terribly, and they used her living in California as another excuse for a trip to the U.S. This time they started in Southern California, made their way up Highway 1, stopping on the way to visit friends in Santa Cruz, on the way to San Francisco and friends there, and then across country to Cleveland, always paying a visit to Auntie Fody, Cousin Susie, the Fleets now in Boston, and all the rest who had stayed in contact during the time in Israel. However, this visit in Cleveland had a deeper significance. Due to an economic decline, the family had lost their house in Israel. Jim advised Honey and Corky to try to recoup their loss by coming back to Cleveland for a period. Ironically, at the very time that Corky and Honey decided to leave Israel, Ilana returned from Southern California. It was bittersweet, welcoming Illy back and then having to say goodbye again. Oren had earned a license in tour guiding, sailing, wall climbing, cycling, and youth group advising. He entered Bar Ilan University in the study of the land of Israel, his great passion. Illy began photography school in Tel Aviv. Rivka had entered Tel Aviv University to study theater arts with a major in directing. The kids remained in Israel. Corky came back to Cleveland in December of 1999, and Honey followed in the spring of 2000. It was very hard for them to leave the kids, but they were going to a safe place, to family that had always been there for them. Although they intended to stay only long enough to recover some of their losses, Corky started doing home remodeling and home repair again. Honey renewed her teaching license and began taking courses to transfer her EFL, English as a Foreign Language degree, to an ESL, English as a Second Language license. She landed 2 jobs, one as an ESL teacher in the Mayfield Middle School, and the other teaching ESL to adults in the Cleveland Adult Basic Literacy Program, first at the old JCC on Mayfield Road, and later at the Case campus. In some ways, life in Cleveland seemed a lot easier than life in Israel. They bought a home on Hampshire Road near Coventry. Soon, Oren, after having pieced together 5 jobs and having trouble making it in Israel, decided that the break he didn't take after his army service should happen now. He decided to join his mom and dad in Cleveland, and he lived in the basement. Oren had his own dreams. The opportunity arose to buy a sailboat, and he declared that he was going to sail to Cuba. When that did not pan out, he bought a used car and vowed to drive across country and return to California, where he had been born. The car broke down in Texas, and he had to tow it back to Cleveland. Then he got practical. He decided to go to graduate school here. Every summer, as the girls continued their schooling in Israel, they came to visit. Now the Masseys could celebrate events once again with the Saunts. Every Friday night, Corky and Honey shared a Shabbat meal with Jim and Charlotte. Jim's 60th birthday was celebrated at the Hampshire house. The Brit for Jamie's oldest son, Elijah, was held at the Hampshire house. Honey not only got the ESL license, but she got a master's degree from Cleveland State in curriculum and instruction with a specialty in ESL. Orrin did not get to California, at least not then. He fell in love with a California girl in Cleveland, Deborah Sagan, a Jewish educator at Temple Tifereth, Israel. Unfortunately, by this time, Honey and Corky's marriage had ended, and Corky moved back to California. Honey turned 60 in Cleveland, and Deb and Orrin threw a 60s party for Mom turning 60. The Sant family also grew larger. Julian, Jamie's second son, was born. Honey's cousin Lou, who lives in Cleveland, married Cheryl. Her cousin Roger, who lived in California, had married Rochelle. Honey stayed busy working and studying, involved with Bethel the Heights Synagogue. She even brought her friend Sarah to Cleveland for a speaking tour, which gave her a lot of joy during a difficult time for Sarah. Orrin now proceeded to get a master's degree from the Mandel School for Nonprofits. He had begun working on another master's degree at the College of Jewish Studies. Now that he would have 2 advanced degrees, he felt ready to get married. There were 3 celebrations, one in each of the special places in Honey's life. Before the wedding was a celebration in Israel on the beach. At this celebration, the family was introduced to Illy's boyfriend, Isaac Michan, who was a fellow student in Illy's photography school. Deb and Orrin's wedding took place in the Bay Area, Deb's home, and then a party in Cleveland for the local friends and family. Orrin's sisters had come for the wedding, and they decided to stay in Cleveland. Within 1 year, Elena's Israeli boyfriend left Israel to come to New York, and Illy joined him there. The family continued to grow. After Deb and Orrin's son, Zev Michael, was born, Orrin graduated from the College of Jewish Studies with another master's degree. But the traditions remained the same. Holidays and vacations were spent together. Isaac and Elena came in from New York. Isaac was introduced to Auntie Fodi and became a special brother to Elijah and Julian. When Deb, Orrin, and Zevi made Aliyah according to their quote-unquote marriage agreement, Rivka joined her sister and Isaac in New York. Honey began making trips to Israel to see her new grandson Zev, and Orrin and Deb made reciprocal visits to the United States to go camping with the whole Massey clan on vacations. There was a cabin in the Alleghenies in the summer, one year, Thanksgiving at Fire Island in New York. Deb and Orrin had another son, Ari Yaakov, so more trips for Honey to visit Israel to see now her 2 grandsons there. The whole Massey clan got together for Passover at Orrin and Deb's in Israel. Deb and Orrin decided that 3 years in Israel was enough, and it would be wise to move to the Bay Area where Deb's family lives, where Orrin had been born, and where Orrin dreamed of going when he had first returned to the U.S. But the family traditions continued. In fact, a new routine was worked up. Thanksgiving in New York with the girls and Isaac, Pesach in Cleveland shared with the Sant Miller clan. Jamie had meanwhile brought Mick Miller into the clan, and summer vacation get-togethers in California, with Illy and Isaac and Rivka coming from the East Coast. It was a good life, but there was something missing. With the children on both coasts, there was a loneliness in Cleveland for Honey. So she planned for her retirement with a move to be with her grandchildren in California. But along came Bud. It was a slow courtship, but due to circumstances, things moved rather rapidly. They had actually met decades before. Bud's wife had died, and after 3 years of being alone, Bud was open for a relationship. Honey introduced Bud to the costume routine for Purim, and Bud introduced Honey to the walking routine with his buddies. And then Bud was introduced to the whole Massey Sant clan. He didn't run away screaming. Then began a lovely series of events. Jamie and Mick got married. Honey threw a party for Bud's 70th birthday, both in Cleveland and in a city new for her. Honey added a fourth city to her routine, Chicago, and a new family, Bud's mother Millie, who will turn 100 in July, and his brother Alan, who lives in Greater London, his son Dan, who lives in Denver, with his wife Carrie. So, both of them expanded their travel itineraries. New York with Isaac and Ilona, California with Deb, Oren, Zev, and Ari and Rivka, who had now moved to join them, and travels to Connecticut, Maine, Niagara Falls, Rochester, New York, camping trips with the Massey clan, Pesachs in Cleveland, with the grandsons camping out on the living room floor, but always the costumes. This past fall, there was another great event, the birth of Eitan Mishan. Honey and Bud spent a month babysitting Eitan in New York toward the end of last year. Remember that plan for retirement in California? It has gone through many transformations over the last 3 years. In the beginning, it was a mother-in-law suite in back of Oren and Deb's small house. That changed when Bud entered the picture. It became a multi-generational dwelling with spaces for Bud and Honey, for Oren and Deb and their boys, and shared space for all. Many of you who know about this might be wondering what is happening on this front. The most concrete thing that exists to date is this beautiful Lego display of the design of the house, courtesy of Zev and Ari Massey. Well, that's the story of Honey. We are happy that so many of the people here are part of this story. We look forward to many more joyous events shared with friends and family in the years